Welcome to SHOWstudio on day 4 of Milan. I'm joined here by a panel to discuss Jill Sanders' show, which should be starting shortly, and we'll just introduce everybody. So if you want to introduce yourself and explain what you do.
Okay, I'm Dean Mayo Davies, the Fashion Features Editor of Dazed and Confused.
I'm Rob Phillips and I'm the Creative Director of the London College of Fashion for the School of Design and Technology.
I'm Hettie. I'm a writer. I work with Art Review and the Fashion Museum in Antwerp.
And I'm Mandi Lennard and I run a fashion consultancy called Mandi's Basement. So before the show starts, it might be a good idea to explain a little more about what you're doing. Hettie, you've been researching a book recently, is that right?
I've just finished my catalogue essay for the next MoMU exhibition, which is about 50 years of the Antwerp Academy. So it's been quite interesting actually talking to Rob about his students, because I've been interviewing people that have studied there over the last, well, not 50 years, but 35 years. And having incredibly sweet chats with Walter van Beirendonck about when he and Martin Margiela were in their final year. And they were still meant to do these presentations that were very classical Parisian style presentations with little chignons and polite models. And at that point they'd all forged tickets to get into Yves Montand and Jean-Paul Gaultier on the wrong paper, and they wouldn't rip properly, but they'd go in and see them. And they saw kind of, Pat Cleveland and Jerry Hall kind of sassying down the runway, and that's what they wanted for their final show. So they had a huge fight with the school. And I think they had to do something conservative, and then the next year that was Dirk Bickenbergs and De Meester managed to get something that was a bit more raunchy.
It's interesting that you mention Walter van Beirendonck, because Raf Simons was doing, I think he was work experience with him at the very beginning of his career, and it was when Walter van Beirendonck took him to Paris, I think in '92, when it was the Martin Margiela all white collection that he was inspired to get into fashion.
And it was actually the director of the Academy, Linda Loppe, that I think kind of started talking to him and said, you shouldn't go to fashion school, it's going to crush you. You should just go straight into it and think about it and work on your own style.
And is the area that you work in, is that more art-based? Because you seem to know a hell of a lot about fashion and you know a lot about fashion designers. Is it equal, or what's the focus?
I started off quite a long time ago now with a column on the alternative art scene in the Times, which is about nearly 20 years ago.
Was that the era with the Brits, the Brit artists coming through, or was that before
yes,
then?
it was just at the tail end of the YBAs, but it was really more to do with kind of dealing with things like installations and people working in sound, and then this thing of people starting to exhibit design, and the idea of exhibiting design and fashion in a different kind of way, not behind a glass case, was quite new at that point. And then I got more into design and fashion really as well.
I think fashion really now, it's almost like fashion is culture, isn't it? Because anything can be fashion, anything inspires a designer. And Rob, what about you? What's the focus of the course that you're working on? You're the creative director at London College of Fashion. Do you want to tell us something about that?
Well, I cover 19 courses, all very fashion specific. We decided a long time ago at London College of Fashion that womenswear, menswear, surface textiles was far too broad, and people wanted to specialise. They wanted courses that specialised in the specifics of fashion, such as contour, intimate apparel, sportswear, bespoke tailoring and things like that. So I cover all of those.
And textiles.
3D and textiles, knit, textiles embroidery, textiles weave, etc. We cover all of those, and I look after them, the creative sort of aspects of them, and how to get students to feel more creative about what they're doing, because things can become very technical at times. So I'm up all the time, and it's a hard job. It's difficult.
Are there enough students to fill all these? Because it's a very diverse array of courses.
Very
but
much so.
how many students are in the smallest classes, for example?
The smallest would be maybe a first year group of, say, it could be 14 if it's sportswear.
That's still a lot.
And it could be, but women's wear, I'm sure you'll be aware, it'd be the 24s, and I might have 7 groups of 24 women's wear. I have a lot of students. Fashion is so.
Do you remember their names?
So insanely popular. I'm dreadful. I remember them by what they do.
Right.
And then eventually
That's a great thing, though.
Eventually I remember their name.
And do you do a lot of nodding?
Never. I do a lot of talking, far too much for my own good.
And Dean, you've worked for a hell of a lot of people in a very short space of time. I mean, your career is quite amazing, and you were recently made fashion features editor of Dazed and Confused magazine and Dazed Digital, so they're joining the dots of the magazine very much so. And how is your role with the magazine and all these sort of designers that we've been reviewing in Milan? And
it's great, really. It's great to, you know, be part of a team and to kind of have a place to kind of, you know, build the next 6 months of the vision of the magazine, basically. And in terms of kind of uniting the digital with the print, I think that's really important as well, to have a kind of more holistic approach to the way that we do things.
But how does it work when you're, I know that you have a certain amount of stories you have to put out every day, which is a big pressure, but then you have the magazine as well. How do you work across both of those media?
With a lot of lists and planning, basically. Yeah, you learn to become very good at planning.
And how do we feel about the Jill Sanders show? Because this, obviously, she's just come back to the brand, and this is her second season. And you know, it was an exciting return last season. And how do we feel about what she's going to be doing today? Because she did say that last season was a summer collection. It was a great collection to come back to because it's light and airy, which I found quite strange, actually, because I think that a designer can really impress when it's a winter collection. So I thought that was, I don't know, I mean, it's good, you know, she was trying to make the point about airy because she's very bold and strong shapes. But how do you feel about this, her being here and doing a second collection?
I think this one is the one to look forward to because it's going to outline more the vision of the future. And I think it's kind of weird you talking about the kind of summer collection point, because when Phoebe Philo came back, hers was a summer or a pre-collection, wasn't it? So maybe it's quite nice to kind of start off more capsule and then kind of see it unfold. But, you know, I think at the moment, in terms of like the climate of fashion, it does seem that, you know, with a lot of recent appointments and the musical chairs, you know, people need to be given the time to kind of develop, really. It's such a fast industry. We need to remember people need a few seasons.
So this is really her comeback season, in a way,
I would say,
yeah. And Hettie, how do you feel about fashion for women? You know, Jill Sanders was probably one of the designers that put women's pants on the map. Elegant clothing for a woman in business. You know, it was the 80s with the executive and women going through the glass ceiling, you could say. So her clothing was quite masculine.
Yeah, I mean, I guess with Donna Karan in New York and Jill Sanders in Europe, it was the kind of wardrobes of the working woman. I think what's also quite interesting as well is if you move away from Southern Europe and Paris, there are labels that definitely cater to women who are a little bit older and a little bit more sophisticated, and that style isn't led by wanting to look like a teenage girl and being driven by getting an awful lot of nipping and tucking going on and this kind of thing. And I guess she was slightly at the forefront of that, you know, mature elegance. Which actually, even saying mature elegance sounds really negative, but it's you know, it's the idea that you can be stylish and interested in fashion and powerful without having to be aggressive about it necessarily as well.
I remember the designer of Hysteric Glamour, what's his name? It's gone from me. But he once said that they had no target audience except for young-minded, starving angels. And I thought that was really beautiful because in a way I think that the most successful labels are the one who are very open and they almost want the customer's interpretation of their brand rather than dictate to them how they should be.
But then you do definitely, I mean, you do definitely see a kind of consideration going into her designs for a different kind of female shape as well. I mean, the fact that you might not want to expose your upper arms or that you might not want to have a lot of cleavage going on and this kind of thing. So you definitely get kind of alternatives coming out, I find, with her garments, where you'll get one that's...
the beginning of last season.
Yeah, where you'll get the sleeveless and you'll get it kind of going down, so it becomes easier to wear, I think.
You've just touched on a very good point about Jill Sanders, actually, the discipline, because she's an incredibly disciplined woman. And funnily enough, when you think about Jill Sanders, you think about minimalism, but she doesn't in fact like that. She prefers it to be informed and purist design. And there's a lot of control, even right down to how the staff behave in her stores. So again, how important do you think it is, Rob, when a designer has a brand and they're controlling that image? You know, can you really control it to the minutiae, or do you have to almost like allow it to breathe? How controlling can you be as a designer?
Well, Depends on how OCD you are, isn't it, really? I mean, I would, Eddie Slimane and the whole, that's control to another level. I think fashion is at a time now where designers are almost too controlling in every aspect, not just, obviously they should be controlling over the store, the experience, that's what speaks to the consumer, but when it gets to magazines, advertising, I mean, I think control can get a little bit out of hand and almost obsessively so and unnecessary. It's consumers, creatives will do what they wish with it, and that's what makes it really beautiful. But of course, when you have such controlled collections such as hers, you are going to see that continue on at every single stage, right to the point of somebody wearing it. But that's the bit you can never control. Who buys it? And
do we think that that control is maybe part of how her relationships with Patrizia Bertelli and Prada Group, how that has almost like fractured the relationships because she is so controlling? It, you know, is for someone who has got that vision and wants to be very precise, is anybody going to be able to manage a situation like that?
She just wants to personify herself, and she obviously cares absolutely deeply for the craft that she executes, and I think sometimes that can be almost so much that you can't take your opinion out of the equation. It must be embedded within it, and that's where you'd probably see friction occur, wouldn't you? And of course that's when the dynasty of Jill Sander's career probably begins. I don't know, I mean, can we work with control freaks? Yes, of course we can, and it's a wonderful thing to do, and when you're as talented as Jill Sander, I think you can kind of get away with it.
I think Victoria Beckham said actually very recently that she completely micromanages, and I can relate to that. I mean, I think that really controlling things as far as you can, if it's a creative element, you want to achieve that.
It's love though, isn't it? It's absolute love, and when you're abundantly in love with something, you want to shape it and make it as much as you can. It's why we all become devastated when a relationship ends, because suddenly you lose all control.
I think it would be very unfair of me to introduce the element of Raf Simons' years at Jill Sander, because we've got lovely Dean sat here who is a complete Raf Simons authority. But do you want to maybe mention about how you felt when he came over the reins? Because for someone like me who knew Jill Sander very early on, just through having seen her at retail. It's almost like a new generation when he came in, so it would be interesting for you to maybe share your thoughts on that.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I kind of obviously, you know, remember the brand from the late 90s with, you know, the campaigns, which were amazing. You know, some of them didn't feature the clothes in. It was very much that kind of Comme des Garçons spirit, which was kind of exciting. But it was really with Raf Simons, I think, in 2005 that kind of introduced a new era of Jill Sander, definitely. Because, you know, we forget he's known for his womenswear now, but at the time it was a big risk to put him as a designer being responsible for men's and women's. And I think the first few collections were kind of very respectful of Jill Sander, actually. He kind of, like this thing I was talking about, kind of giving a designer space to breathe and develop their vocabulary. He kind of started, you know, very pure with, you know, the first 3 or 4 collections, kind of variations on a theme, more or less. And then built into this kind of crescendo, you know, what was it, Autumn Winter 12. So.
But I think when you do start in a position like that, you almost have to show that respect for the designer that you're paying homage to.
And he is a massive fan of Jill Sander, you know, absolutely.
And then once you've paid that homage, then you can have a little bit of fun and maybe bring some of your own personality into it. Do you think that he's done that? Because what's amazing to me is that someone who came in who was the designer that they felt could continue the line without Jill Sander, has actually almost become the competition. You know, he's become so successful at it, and now, you know, he is so respected in his own right. So do you think that, how do you feel about, you know, him? It's almost, it must be strange for someone like you who's been such a big fan of Raf Simons that he's suddenly not there.
Yeah. But, you know, he's in a great place as well. He's got Dior, and, you know, that's kind of, to think that someone that started off doing kind of menswear back in the 90s, you know, it was of a very strict silhouette linked to a lot of tribes and subculture, can end up as, you know, the creative director of perhaps one of the most famous brands in the world that, you know, your nan would know about and buy a perfume down Superdrug or something. Is amazing. you know, I think it's great. And you know, Jill Sander is obviously someone that, you know, is still very relevant. Her Uniqlo collaboration was a great success.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, it's kind of maybe a kind of serendipity in the way that she's back there and Raf is able to do his thing now.
She actually started consultancy when she left, and her first client was Fast Retailing, who were Uniqlo. So that's where that came about. And yes, I think also with all the designer collaborations with High Street, that was very timely as well, wasn't it?
And it was done so well. It was really done very well.
I personally felt that the men's was a bit stronger than the women's with the Uniqlo. But Jill Sander has continually displayed herself as an incredible businesswoman as well. I think at one point when she went back to the company for that short period before she went again, she was even looking after the books, and she was very staunch about that, and she was very hands-on. It was that whole micromanaging thing, I imagine. But she seems to have done things the other way around. So she started with a store. It wasn't the Jill Sander label then, but she was designing. I think she had Mugler and Rickiel, and then shortly after that she launched her brand. But she also started very early on a perfume, which again, designers work and they seem to aspire to have a retail outlet. That's almost like the ultimate goal, to have a store, to have a flagship, and then you launch the perfume, and it's almost like at the later. But she seems to have done it very much the other way around. How do you find designers, you know, do a lot of your students, do they want to leave and start their own designer brands? Is that how they're regarding fashion?
Well, each student's obviously different, but that's almost like a dream, isn't it? Students do dream of having this moment where they can, but they always think, maybe they misconstrue what that moment would be, is where they think that the moment will be, I can do whatever I want, and you present it on this catwalk, and well, hey, it's great, and there's sound, there's vision, there's all my emotion comes out here. The issue with that is, of course, they need a sense of realism of, well, you can do that dream, but people want to buy it. And sometimes there's a degree of control with that dream and editing that dream, and that's what fashion school does, really, is it shows you a certain reality about fashion. It's not all about you can do anything you want and people just sit there and love it. There's, you know, people need to buy this, people need about prices, fabric, colour, and then, do you see what I mean?
I think
but it's the dream.
Yeah, I think also that just the show, it looks like everyone's seated and we might be starting shortly. But actually that dream, these big venues, it's funny, a lot of the designers that we all know here, you know, they put on shows in the East End, and some of them are off schedule, then they go into the bursary scheme, New Gen and Fashion East. And it's also the ultimate dream to be on one of the international on schedule in a fabulous venue,
of course.
with an incredible set. And I think Milan really does put on a show in a very a little bit like in the 80s when it was Montana and Mugler in Paris. I think like Milan is almost doing these homage shows now.
Right? Yeah. It wasn't even a fashion show, that was more like theatre. It's most dramatic.
That's the thing about Milan, is that you know, for someone not working in fashion, it's what you would expect a fashion show to feel like. It's exactly like that, with the, you know, the loud thumping music, the lights, all the biggest, you know, supermodels. It's kind of, that's it.
Do you remember the year, well, I'm sure that Comedy Arsenal would have done it a few times, but there was one com show where there was no soundtrack, and it was kind of really weird. It was complete silence. And it almost made the audience feel very uncomfortable. It's like, because they didn't expect it.
I love it.
Yeah.
I think that's why I enjoy student shows so much, is when they can choose their own music, because it's very telling what they...
It is very much the sensory experience, isn't it? And of course Jill Sander, very much a designer who's associated with classic navy and tailoring.
Yes, that's the thing we didn't talk about with control before, because with the tailoring, I guess once you step into one of her garments, there is still a control about the way that somebody wears it as well, isn't there?
And she was completely non-compromising about materials as well. I mean, when she was starting out, her price points for suits and tailoring, I mean, it was really expensive, but it was like Donna Karan, the customer just felt $1 million in it because of the cut and fit.
Well, I know she doesn't like to refer to herself as a minimalist or reductive, but I firmly believe that constructivism is in her DNA, and it's tectonic. It's
how do we feel about the bags? You know, this look of the bags being held at the hip.
Beautiful.
But the hand going through
very
the
nice
straps.
mannerism.
It's actually quite, I mean, it's actually quite a nice way to carry a bag. I can imagine it feels pretty good.
And of course, we've got a dream team backstage, creative team. Guido's done the hair, and Pat McGrath the makeup, and Joe McKenna, who we're all a big fan of, has done the styling again. He did the show last season.
She's really stamping her signature back out, isn't she? It's from those first opening looks. She's like,
it was like a greatest hits last season, wasn't it? Straight away.
Done, this is what I do, and this is how I do it for now.
Are we going to be able to get some kind of details after the live stream?
Where she cuts everything is so beautifully, almost like moulded. Almost, it's like it's almost beyond the stand. It's like come out of a laboratory. It hasn't come out of an atelier.
That's a wonderful silhouette, isn't it? With that short sleeve on the dress coat. And like you referred to earlier, Hettie, there's the sleeveless column dresses too, beautifully cut, tailored dresses that are sleeveless.
And do these have pockets at 2 different levels as well?
She was also a designer who very much introduced separates to fashion. And in a way you could say she was one of the first to do layering.
Yeah.
And I think also we're seeing a little bit of that with some of these 3/4 coats over the dresses.
And so it means you can get a flash of colour without being overwhelmed by it as
well. Well, you know, what do you aspire to as a customer? If you wanted a piece of Jill Sander, for me it would be a coat or a blazer. And I think
that will go through many seasons.
Yes.
And these ones that have got that flash of colour coming through, that one that had the rust coming through the front and back that was beautiful. I mean, I can imagine that would be...
It was quite amazing when she did first introduce colour, because it was quite shocking colour, wasn't it? It was like an acid yellow, Dean. Did you like it when she started doing her colour? Is that something that you recall?
Yeah, I mean, it adds another layer to, I mean, like we were discussing just then, the cuts of the clothes is so immaculate. When you add something as visually strong as that, it kind of heightens it to a whole new level. I mean, the way the skirts are moving, there was a leather look earlier on.
I love that length,
it was incredible.
the midi length. But it wasn't just colour that she introduced, it was the way in which she introduced the colour. It was almost like a splash of colour, or it was a slick, or some, you know, it wasn't just an article in a colour. So in a way for me, when she started doing her colour, it was almost like a radical way of introducing colour that satisfied maybe a new generation of customer for her. Because she's 68 now, you know, and she's had the most incredible experience, and that's what she says gives her the confidence to do this now.
It's so aware of women, as I think that's what makes it so brilliant. It's not, you can really see it's a woman designing for other women. And I think you were right earlier when it's about saying mature design. It almost sounds bad, doesn't it? Because anybody could put this on, and this is...
I mean, this collection looks very much satisfying to the buyers.
I was going to say,
these are real selling pieces, aren't they?
There's first 5
unmistakably
looks,
Jill
easy.
Sander.
Beautiful footwear. And you'd think she was a colourist at heart, wouldn't you? It's so immaculately considered and so well balanced.
It is an extraordinary palette, actually. So we've got this kind of very cool... actually, we were talking about the little spring flowers before, so you can almost imagine that's like a kind of primrosy colour, and then that deep sky blue and the rust colours coming through.
In the show notes, they referred to Oscar Mayo, the architect, who sadly died last year. Do you think that the central piece is an homage to Mayo?
No, I wouldn't.
No?
Not so much. I mean, I'm kind of surprised that she referenced Mayo, because he's known for his very sensual curves. And I think, you know, while we've been talking
Do you
about...
think that's where that print sort of, or the weave and the knit came through as to the waist?
Possibly.
It just
like
so
the
you've got
silhouette of
this
dress.
kind of, that kind of
Very
shape,
Mayo, isn't it?
But I mean, it's funny because, you know, she has many amazing qualities, but one thing that I wouldn't necessarily associate with Jill Sanders' work is a kind of sexy, sensual, kind of womanly, curvaceous feeling. Not so, when I was looking at the transition between her and he who is not currently being named very much, yeah, that was the big move from something that became a really very sexy silhouette to something that was more controlled.
Do you think there's a little bit of fetish about Jill Sander in the precision of her design? There's a strapless dress that just came on and it was almost very trussed up.
Strictness.
Yeah, very strictness.
Well, this is quite amazing as well, with that it's got a very deep... Sorry.
No, you were on a roll.
No, there was a very deep slit up the front with kind of what looked like sequins going up as well. So I mean, you know, having said there's not very much sexiness.
She did introduce sequins actually for the first time last season, Dean. They were quite interesting the way she did that, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was like a polka dot with an iridescent kind of, this kind of iridescent material. And that had a centrepiece in the middle of the catwalk as well. It had a kind of concave bowl in the middle, which was only really apparent during the finale when the models walked through it.
I mean, that is completely purist, isn't it? That is unmistakably how she has always strived her clothes to be, with that strict, rigid perfection, you could say.
I do find it, that's what I was going to say in terms of, I kind of disagree, I've always found her work really sexy.
Really?
But maybe because it's so controlled and almost untouchable sexy. It must take...
Rip them off sexy.
To dress like this must take...
Yes.
I mean, you mustn't walk. You know, I mean, just so you look so precise.
It's a little bit S&M in its discipline.
Well, we
all love a bit of S&M because we all love a bit of discipline, if we, you know.
And is that rubber or leather that I couldn't really tell from this distance?
I thought it was vinyl, the first skirt, but it could be a very fine leather.
The sound, though, this is the music to the show. It makes it feel quite sombre, almost quite heavy. It's the colours, I think, are amazing. Often I feel like when I look at these colours, I'm looking at them through some sort of gauze because they're almost sort of slightly blurred off. They're bright but not bright. Does that make sense?
Yeah, by comparison to the orange she had in the last season, which was a real kind of, you know, street sweeper orange. This was a...
Definitely.
I don't know, that was more kind of Buddhist orange. Pale Buddhist orange.
Did she come out at the last show?
Yep.
Yeah, she did a little wave.
Thinking of traditional outfit of choice as well, isn't it? A navy jacket, trousers.
Yes.
Which I think she said that if she had to take if she could only ever have 3 items of clothing or something, it would be a navy jacket, a white shirt.
And jeans. Yeah. What are the fashion pack like? I mean, as soon as that show is over, they're out there.
Savages.
because of the schedule tool. And actually, I think this is the perfect moment for us to actually photobomb this set with Hettie, your wonderful son's outfit. Can we have a little cameo, do you think? Isn't that wonderful? Very Jill Sander colour palette there. That's just great. Should we give Jill Sander a round of applause?
That's great.
So how do we feel about the show? She's very back at the helm, she's flexing her muscles and she's being true to herself. How do you feel about it, Hettie?
Well, I think it was funny because at the beginning we were talking about it being interesting that she came back in with a spring-summer collection and that she was talking positively about it being light. And Dean was talking about, you know, sometimes it takes a couple of seasons for people to really come back into a collection with all guns blazing, and this felt like a much stronger show, I felt, than the summer one. I mean, the summer did have, you know, the polka dots and bits and pieces, but it was a bit...
I like the colour palette of the summer one, I must admit. I thought that was an interesting colour palette for a summer collection.
I mean, I think it was a gentle reintroduction. I wasn't overwhelmed by it, whereas this had some very strong shapes, and I think there was an awful lot of kind of architecture going on in the bodices. And, I mean, I'd like to see some close-ups in a bit, but you could see that there were all kinds of interesting bits of kind of tucking going on.
Can we see any tweets at all? Maybe some of the pictures. I'm sure there's going to be an army backstage. And Rob, it's interesting what we were talking about, the sexiness that you brought up, because actually I found the severity of the clothing incredibly sexy and feminine.
Definitely.
It's wonderful.
The focus on, I mean, even the arm in terms of how long you do your sleeve, as much as it can, at first glance you could say, well, that was quite covered. When you really start looking at it, actually there's a lot of flesh on show, and those lines that she cuts really emphasise.
There was one jacket
the casting is very cleverly also added to this, hasn't it? Is how the beautiful emphasis across your décolletage, and I find it very sexy.
There was one jacket, actually, the one that I mentioned, that had the short sleeve, and in no way was that twee, but from every other designer that would do something like that, it would be kind of cutesy and a little bit twee. How did you feel about it, Dean?
I think it's a really strong collection. I liked the way that the black, I don't know if it was the vinyl or leather, the way that kind of flowed. I mean, especially on the computer screen, you don't have the same detail, but you know, it was almost liquid. Yeah, I think it's a very strong collection.
And how do you think about the audience? Because again, we were talking about Raf coming in and making Jil Sander attractive to a younger generation of a Jil Sander customer. Do you think that this still pays homage to the youthful nature?
I think what that Uniqlo collaboration showed was there is a huge appetite for her designs among younger customers, but and then maybe that's actually opened her up to a new audience. It's funny, actually. You know, it may not have been a deliberate career path, but actually it could, in an interesting way, bring a new audience into her kind of quite cool values.
And I think you can see that with the shoes, actually. The shoes have got kind of crossover potential, I think.
I think it's quite interesting that you've mentioned shoes, Dean, because you arrived here today with some quite spectacular footwear. Would you like to share these with the audience, please?
Oh, if I must.
Do we get the sparkle of them in the picture? Just because these are new Saint Laurent ones. I was about to say a criminal word, which was Eve. It is Saint Laurent.
Saint Laurent, indeed.
And this isn't the only pair that you have, is it?
No, I've indulged, let's just say.
Yeah, I think you mentioned you got them in every colour.
Yeah.
Okay.
Wow.
But I also think that a young customer, a younger person wanting to buy into fashion, be whether they can afford it or whether they're on lower income, they want to look grown up. I don't think they want to look trendy for the sake of being trendy. I think they're actually quite sophisticated now with the internet and the access to what you can see. They actually want to look quite sophisticated. Would you agree with that?
I think so. I think it's a different climate to, you know, it's not like the 90s anymore. You know, there's a lot more of a cross-referencing and mixing and matching going on.
No, it's quite funny. I've certainly noticed that with the way that kind of girls on the street are dressing now, there's much more of that quite Parisian restraint, and you know, people wearing kind of skinny jeans and blazers and more like a kind of uniform. Whereas before, I think people did just kind of throw everything in. And it's funny. I think British women have come better dressed, but maybe a little bit more restrained. There's less of that craziness, and you can see that having a lot of appeal. It's funny mentioning the shoes, because I think one of the reasons that she was interested in working with Prada in the first place is because of the shoes and bags, and she was wanting to expand on that.
That makes a lot of sense.
So I mean, she had some really gorgeous bags and very interesting shoes in this show as well. So hopefully that's been a lovely fruit.
But people that I know that buy the shoes and bags, because obviously they're less expensive than the clothing, and they can buy into that like you would a perfume. They agonise about getting them. I mean, people that I know, they're obsessive about getting Jil Sander accessories. I mean, it's quite phenomenal, the cult that she's built.
It's a big price point. This isn't the most accessible of designers to be able to go in and buy. You've got to really love this. My fella's just bought, I think he bought Jil Sander, I would have thought it was under Raf, the Python.
They were great.
Python, now that sounds expensive.
Like so,
even more expensive.
The love and obsession of them, the expense goes out the window. And the same with students, is I'll find that students will, you know, their money should be going on their studies, if you ask me. I hope they remember that. However, you know, if it's going to go on anything good, then buy a Jil Sander shoe.
That's the power of fashion. It's amazing when you know, it's not the most important thing in the world, but.
What people would do to get it, and what they would save to get it, or
that's when it really means something, and you know, you really love it.
Actually, Garance Doré tweeted the other day a link to her website, and she was talking about Ursula Gusselheim, you know, the fashion editor of Wallpaper, and I clicked on it, and Ursula actually was an intern for me years ago. and she was commenting on her wearing a piece of Jill Sander, and I was thinking, oh my God, this is nothing new. As an intern earning no money, she was agonising about Jill Sander.
With
yes,
the veil.
the pale blue.
Yeah, I saw her wearing that at some shows.
Yeah, and I think it's a few seasons old. So you know, this is someone who, you know, is one of that early cult following who's stuck with it, who still loves Jill Sander. It's not like they've moved on to something else. I think the staying power of the brand has been quite exceptional, considering the musical chairs that's been going on. So it's quite
super desirable. And didn't she make a comment that she wanted to put Jill Sander back on a luxury track or something last season? Something about she really wanted to embed that and the quality and the design.
I was surprised that she said that, just because was that almost like a derogatory comment to where it had become, or how do we?
I think she's trying to say that I have a clientele that was with me in the beginning. They will come back, and I'm happy to have the new clientele that comes with it. But now I want to push it on to whatever level that she feels it needs to be at.
Do you really think? Do we really think though that a Jill Sander customer went away, Raf came in, and now they've come back because Jill's back? I mean, I almost feel that the brand has been quite consistent, miraculously, considering the change. How do you feel about that, Hettie?
I have to say, I think, you know, if I'm being absolutely brutal, I think before Raf got involved, I wouldn't even have looked at Jill Sander. I wouldn't have. It was too conservative for me, and it probably actually, if I was being realistic, I probably would have looked at it and found lots of things that I loved, but it just wouldn't even have occurred to me to look at it.
It's very interesting that you're saying that, because Dean said something similar when we were having a chat earlier on, and I was a big fan of Jill actually before then. So, and I'm a big fan of Raf, so I would have thought I was someone that would be a candidate to kind of jump on the Raf years. But as a brand, I think it's been quite incredible how they've kept the and her saying that, bring the customer back, it's almost like, in a way, wouldn't that be her way of saying the wider audience, meaning not just the newbie, but the person who is maybe a little bit more mature.
Absolutely.
But I mean, I think there were pieces in this collection that I found incredibly attractive as well, so it's
there's a few pieces in here that are reminiscent of old Jill Sander, and you know, the height of the shoe is in the sole of the shoe. I remember if you used to go into the Jill Sander store, which is now, I can't even say the name because I dislike it so much. But you know what I mean, don't you? It's beautiful, beautiful. I mean, I shouldn't even say that. This amazing store, and it was like walking into a gallery, and it was just, you know, as you'd expect with Jill Sander, it's an object every 16 metres. But then you could really appreciate it. And I think I can see this sitting very comfortably with how she.
It's interesting to mention the store, because actually, when the company first posted losses, it was quite shocking, because we weren't used to a brand that was been so successful posting losses. But part of the company's problems at that time were the fact that she was pumping the money into these flagship stores. And you know, going back to what we said about aspiring to having it, maybe you do that later and you build up to it. She was doing it rapid expansion. I mean, that store also, wouldn't you say that store came a little bit after a recession? Maybe it was less appropriate to create this tomb, this shrine to Jill Sander.
It really was. It kind of followed in the footsteps of Comme des Garçons, where, you know, Comme des Garçons will take a store in Paris and have like 3 blocks of it, and there'll be 2 perfumes in there. Obviously Comme can get away with this, and it's a wonderful experience to go in there. Obviously the perfume smell stands out, so you kind of think, well, this is a great atmosphere. For the clothes though, you felt like you would echo if you rattled. It was, but then I have to admit, I went in there. You felt
uncomfortable as a customer?
I didn't ever feel uncomfortable, I just felt very conscious, and I thought actually this is maybe another form of control of how I consume, because I spent a lot longer looking at the product, because there wasn't tons in there, and you spent time studying it and you'd try it on, and people really treated you in a way that, you know, how does it fit you? They'd be very honest that we don't think that fits you correctly.
In Jill Sander. Because actually
so the control continued.
No,
and I believed in it. And
it's true.
Credit card came out.
She does actually discuss how the staff should behave in her stores, so that which you know, if you want to create a brand,
an experience,
you have to consider, yes, exactly, the sensory experience of going into the store is very important.
It's incredibly
I
important.
worked for Comme des Garçons for a couple of years in the early 90s, and it was very much 90% listening to a customer. You didn't dictate anything to the customer, it was very much listening to them, which again I found quite amazing and respectful within the discipline
and
of
knowing
the kind of
this
store you've
stuff,
mentioned.
isn't it? When you're talking to your consumer, knowing this person who's in front of you, telling them about what this collection is about. The store where you shop, when you go into the store, is so much a nicer experience than when you say go to a shop and shop or
I think that also opens up another thing that I've noticed with some of these brands is that again, when I worked for Comme des Garçons, the customers were very interesting. You know, it wasn't like I'd worked in a department store, or you know, I'd met other types of customers, but there were artists, poets, quite cultured, creative customers. There were in the late 80s and 90s, Comme des Garçons was very synonymous with the advertising and Charles Saatchi at the time. Do you think that, Hettie, with your focus, that the type of people that you discuss fashion with in the arts, is Jill Sander a label that they are interested in because of that? It's an interesting discipline.
I think that Jill Sander's the kind of label you'd wear if you're a successful architect or somebody running a gallery, or so it's got that creative edge to it. But I think it also, in part, the kind of pared down, meticulous nature of it also says, well, there's a lot of other interesting stuff going on with me, so I don't need to really scream about my clothes. Yeah, the clothes are working with me, and you know, I've got a lot of personality, and you know, I'm eloquent and self-possessed.
I think Ray Karakubo actually said that you should see the person first. You shouldn't see the outfit. So, and I think that might be a good point to finish. So, thanks very much.
Thank you.
And we'll see how Milan continues.